The Department of Neighborhood Empowerment and the Alliance of River Communities partnered to present this leadership development workshop featuring members of the City Attorney's Office.
Let's go back to some of the issues or concerns that we had raised at the beginning of the meeting. And as I mentioned, these issues, you need to get that firm grasp on the rules and how the rules apply and what to do when you're faced with these rules. The one aspect of it that's non-legal, and I'm going to get into a little bit of that as well, is just an issue about understanding group dynamics. You need to maybe have a little bit of psychology and understanding, how do you deal with different types of people? Different types of people are going to react differently to issues. Some are going to want to be listened to. Some are going to want to know that you've listened to them. Some just want it straight to the point. Give it to me right here, real quick, like that. Do it. And when you start understanding how people respond, it makes it better able for you to communicate. I saw this interesting show on the Brain Games, if anybody kind of watches that. And what they had was they did a couple of experiments. One was with these monkeys, and they had one monkey in one cage and another monkey in another, and they would give the monkey in this cage a cucumber, right? And then they would show the monkey that, hey, I'm giving this monkey a grape, right? Well, the monkey then that would get the cucumber would get furious, start shaking the cage, throw the cucumber at the person, like, why is that person getting a grape and I'm getting this rotten cucumber, right? And they tied it in then to like another social experiment. And they showed these people that were purportedly playing a game show, right? There were several of them there, 3 people. One of the contestants, they would hit the buzzer, and it was rigged, so one of the contestants' buzzers did not work, and it was always coming late. And shortly, when this person would see, like, okay, I hit my buzzer before this person, I know the answer, I'm prepared to answer, and it started escalating that person's behavior. And one of the things that I drew from this is, people have this concept, a self-concept about fairness, all right? So if you appease that concept of fairness for everybody, then you're off to a great start in being able to handle and address situations and keep them from escalating to a point where I don't feel like you're treating me fair. You're treating that person differently than me, that person differently than me. So what you can do to help establish some parameters like that is set the rules early on at the beginning of the meeting. We've prepared a handout here. I'm going to ask Lisette to go ahead and give that out. And it's a neighborhood council meeting script, all right? I don't know, do any of you before your meeting starts, do you kind of have a script that you just read and you lay out the rules for the meeting? Okay? This is a great idea to let everybody know what the rules are, both the public and the members of the board. Go ahead.
I'm not sure if there's enough copies.
So you may have to share.
You may have to share, so I just want to make sure that NC presidents get the script. Okay, so if you can just raise your hand if you're a president, then everyone else will share. And I promise we'll email this to you, okay, on the thingy.
Okay, so this script starts off pretty easy. It's setting the thing. Hello, my name is Darren. I'm the president of the City Neighborhood Council. On behalf of the board, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for attending tonight's meeting. During tonight's meeting, we will be discussing the items listed on the agenda. A copy of the agenda is available for your review on the table at the back of the room. We will be discussing the items in the order listed on the agenda. Then I have options for you, except I will be calling item number 10 out of order. We'll be hearing item 10 before number 3, if that's the case for that meeting. If you would like to speak on an item listed on the agenda, please fill out the speaker card. The speaker cards are located on the table to my right. Please fill out the speaker card, indicate the item number that you would like to speak on, and give your card to me. All right? When the item is called, I will call the speakers from the speaker card that have been provided to me. Every person will have 2 minutes to speak on each agenda item. Then if there's other restrictions, you'd want to include that. All right? If you do not wish to fill out a speaker card, I will ask if there are any other comments that would like to be made before I close the public comment on the agenda. After public comment is concluded, I will then open the discussion for members of the board. Board members will raise their hand to be recognized to speak. And then you include any other board rules if you have them, if you'd like to. After the board's discussion, the board may entertain a motion and vote on that motion. It is important to remember the rules of decorum at all times during this meeting. We will grant each speaker respect to voice their concerns. This means that no other people should be talking when a person has the floor to speak. If you must engage in a conversation, then please go outside of the meeting room to have your discussion. We also do not boo or hiss when someone is speaking. If necessary, I will issue reminders of this rule of decorum throughout the meeting. Okay, then I also have an option here. Members of the public who interfere with the conduct of a neighborhood council meeting by willfully interrupting and or disrupting the meeting are subject to removal by a peace officer. If there is an item that you would like to speak on that is not listed on tonight's agenda, then you may please speak on that issue during the agenda, the item that is listed as general public comments. Please, however, note that as a governmental body, our board is governed by the Brown Act. This law prevents the board from discussing issues that have not been listed on the agenda. Thus, we will not be able to respond to the issues you bring to our attention. This does not mean that we are not concerned with your issue, and the issues brought to our attention during general public comment may become the subject of a future agendized meeting. Last, please put your cell phones on vibrate. Again, welcome to our meeting, and if you have any questions about the Neighborhood Council, you may see me after the meeting or send an email to me at darrenmartinez.lacity.org. So what I've done is I've set the groundwork for the meeting. I've told everybody what the rules are, so everybody has a sense of, okay, I can play by those rules. Those are fair, everybody's gonna be fair. I'm not gonna get incensed or have my pressure rise. And if people start interjecting during the meeting, you remind them, you know. We ask that you keep to the rules of decorum here and respect the speakers when they're speaking. You know, so you do want to set these rules, and you want to make sure that people are following them. You know, and being that leader, and it doesn't matter what your opinion is on people. I mean, everyone knows everyone's going to have differing opinions on issue, but all they want is that sense of knowing that there was fairness, or that there was an aspect of fairness to this process, and that they're being treated just as much as equals with everybody else. With that, I'm gonna go into a short intro about what the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners does. Alois is going to do some how to write agenda, and then I'm going to come back and talk about some specific tools that you can use during your meeting to address, you know, concerns that might arise. But first, with respect to the commission policy that was recently adopted by the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners, I want you to all be aware that there are several requirements for you to go forward with your meetings, okay? One, if you have a website, right? If you have a website, that agenda must be posted to your website, all right? If you don't have control of your website, that's a different issue. But if you have a website, it's got to be posted to your website. You have to send a copy of that agenda within the Brown Act timeframes to the department, all right? The department then will handle the other things on the back end. There's some optional things. You may also email that agenda out to a list of your stakeholders. I hope I got it all right. That's primarily it.
What department?
One place
The Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. The contact form is ncsupport at lacity.org. You have to send it within those timeframes. If you don't, the commission policy requires the meeting to be canceled. All right? So this is a requirement above what you had before. You know, if you got it up in one place, at least physically posted, right? That was the Brown Act challenge you had to meet. Now you have to meet this other requirement in order to go forward with your meeting. So I don't want to see people saying, haha, you sent it to the department late, you know, you can't have your meeting. So remember, adhere to this rule so that you don't have this issue. I want to introduce you now to your regional advisor, Alois Phillips. She's going to discuss how to do the agenda, and then I'll get up and do some facilitation. All right.
Am I working?
He's turning you up right now.
Okay. I don't think I really need a mic.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I'm Alois Phillips, and I've spoken with many of you on the phone or communicated with you by email. It's nice to see all of you here. And some of the questions that I get during the year are questions about, you know, what happens with the agenda? How do I write the agenda? or what needs to be on the agenda, or the DA is getting in touch with me because they say I didn't do the agenda right, or somebody's complaining because of something on the agenda. So what we want to do is kind of go over some tips on how to make your agendas really conform to the Brown Act, so that we can eliminate some of the complaints that you guys are getting on your agendas and keep you from being the topic of conversation in the DA's office.
Are these just for neighborhood council meetings or also committees?
These are for neighborhood council general board meetings and committee meetings. So everybody should have in your packet of information a little handout that I did on agenda preparations. So that in a nutshell is what we're going to be talking about tonight. So the first question we want to say, hey Gracie, is so when is an agenda needed for your neighborhood councils? So your neighborhood council agendas are needed anytime there's a general board meeting or a special board meeting. The standing committees need to have meetings. Ad hoc committees are treated a little differently depending on what the makeup of the committee is. If the committee is based with just pure board members, then you may not necessarily need to post an agenda regarding what's going to be the topic of conversation in your meeting. But if you have stakeholders that are members of that committee, or any non-board member, so if you have somebody from Dunn, that's a non-board member. So you would need to, if you have that person attending the meeting and giving any input, then you would need to have an agenda for that meeting. Any kind of formal or informal gathering that the neighborhood council has where there is going to be business discussed with a number of board members that could take action for the board, then that meeting would need to have an agenda posted. So if you're having a luncheon and there is enough board members that are going to be participating in that luncheon and you're going to be discussing something about your particular neighborhood council, then you would need to post an agenda on that. But if you're going to have a luncheon where you discuss no business at all, and it's purely going to be, you know, what is everybody going to be doing for the summer, then even though it's board members present, you wouldn't have to have the agenda published for that meeting.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
What's the one meeting to deal with issue of homelessness on the library? You'd like to leave the library and maybe one or two more members. If you're dealing with a problem of how to deal with the homeless issue.
If you have that situation, then we need to talk offline so that we can know exactly what's going on, what the circumstances are, and then I can let you know whether or not you need to post an agenda for it.
Okay.
And the best way to get in touch with me whenever you guys have any of these questions is to send me an email. When you have a grievance panel for your neighborhood council, that is going to be something that you should check with the city attorney's office on, because depending on how your grievance panel is set up will determine on whether or not that needs to be a public meeting and whether or not that needs to have an agenda published. Your time frames for posting your agendas, those always have to be in compliance with the Brown Act. So for a general meeting, you have to have it 72 hours ahead of the meeting. Special meetings, you need 24 hours advance notice. And remember, with all of these agendas, as Darren said, you have to make sure that not only are you posting them where they need to be posted and putting them on your website, but you also have to take the extra step and follow through with sending it to Dunn so that they can get it on their early notification system. When you send it, you need to be Brown Act compliant, so you need to follow those time frames. It needs to be 72 hours or 24 hours, depending on what your meeting call is. But that doesn't mean that they have to get it posted within those 72 or 24 hours. They just have to get it up. But you have to comply with the Brown Act with that step. Okay, so
Can you tell us the email again that we have to send the agendas to?
It's ncsupport@lacity.org.
Okay.
okay, so the person who needs to put together these agendas is going to be different depending on what the circumstances are. Committee members, your committee chair should be the one that's coming up with what the agenda is going to be, unless your bylaws say something different. But if you're a committee chair, you shouldn't be depending on your chairman of your neighborhood council to be posting and putting up your committee's agendas. You're the one who's responsible for your committee, and you're the person who would know what kind of business is going to be transacted. And so you need to be responsible for taking that initiative and making sure that the agenda is posted properly according to the time frames, and that you've sent a copy to Dunn so that your meetings don't end up having to be canceled. The reason, of course, that we need to have these agendas posted and properly worded is because they should be designed to give notice to the public of the business that you're going to transact at your meeting. The public should be able to pick up an agenda and say, gee, I wonder what they're going to be talking about at the meeting. I wonder if I need to go or not. I wonder if there's anything on there that I'm really interested in and want to be heard on, or if it's going to be something that, I'm not really interested in that, so I don't need to be that concerned about going. So the public needs to know exactly what it is that's going to be done while you guys are having the meeting. The agendas should be clear and not misleading in what they say about the business that's going to be transacted. For the Brown Act requires that the agenda contain a brief description of each item of business to be transacted. They say it's generally about 20 words or so that you can use for your description, but that doesn't mean that you're limited to 20 words. If it takes you 25 words, that's okay. If it takes you a paragraph, that's okay. The purpose is so that you can let people know what's happening. And if it takes a little bit more to be able to explain that, you want to make the mistake of being overly expansive rather than not giving people enough information to know whether or not they need to go to the meeting or what the issue is. When you're writing your agendas and you're listing the information that needs to be there, you want to make sure that you're not using acronyms. Somebody sent me something this week that said that EYF is meeting at something, 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 and do they have to do something? And I sat there and scratched my head and said, what the heck is EYF? I don't know. I mean, it's not a legal term, so I don't know what it is. So how do I know if they need to be there or not? So imagine if you're just a regular layperson picking that up, and you see that the EYF, whatever it is, committee, is going to be doing something at, or asking money for something. You know, that doesn't give notice to the public of who's asking or what the project is or who's going to be running the project. So try really hard not to assume that everybody knows what your acronyms are. Even if they live in your neighborhood, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to know what it is. If it's somebody new coming into your neighborhood who you know, it's a new homeowner, they're not going to know what EYF is. So take the time to spell it out. Because otherwise you're not giving proper notice. Make sure that when you have an item that you're listing on the agenda, that if you have additional information that would help them understand what the item is about, that you draw a link to it. So if you're, for instance, talking about the project on Melrose Avenue, at 6300 Melrose Avenue, that's going to be a big, building. If there is a link that you can direct people to that will let them know what that project is and they can get more information on it, then feel free to just at least list the link so that they have as much information on it as they can get before they get to the meeting, so that they can be well informed about whatever the item is that's on your agenda. Also, if you have funding issues where you're asking for funds for a particular organization, you can certainly put a link that will let people know what this organization is about. Who is it that's asking for the money? Who is it that the neighborhood council wants to sponsor, or not sponsor, but wants to provide the money to? What is the project that the neighborhood council is seeking to use to benefit the community? What is it? So give them as much information as you can. If you have minutes that you want board members to look at ahead of time to see if they have any changes, feel free to put the link on there or attach a copy of the minutes so that they can read this ahead of time before they get to the meeting, so that they're well informed on if there's any changes that need to be made to the minutes before they get to the meeting, so that they're not distracted by reading the draft of the minutes while you're transacting business. Let's talk about best practices for agenda items. So you want to always, when possible, include the name and the title of anybody that's making a presentation to the board. Somebody may look at that and decide, well, I know this person, or I know of this agency, or I have something that I want to inform the neighborhood council about based on this person that's coming in making this presentation. So based on that, somebody may decide to come to the meeting, or they could decide they don't need to come to the meeting because they feel this person will give an accurate presentation of whatever the issues are. Regarding funding items, when you put a request in your agenda or a motion that you're going to make for a particular funding item, you should always include the amount that you're going to ask for, or up to a certain amount that you contemplate is going to be asked for, so that people know, okay, is it going to be $1,000 that goes to trees? Well, I may have something I want to say about that, because $1,000 is a lot of money. But if it's $20, somebody may say, let them just do whatever they want to do with the $20 or $200 or whatever. So make sure that you let the public know what is being proposed and how much of an amount it is that is at stake, so that they know whether or not they should be there to voice their opinion.
And it doesn't have to be an accurate number, right? Because they're being used the phrase up to $1,000, up to $300.
Right.
Okay.
You don't have to know the exact number. But you want to kind of give a range. You want to let people know that we're talking about $1,000 versus $10,000. You know, because somebody may be really concerned about, why are you giving this organization $10,000? That's a lot. That's a lot of hamburgers. So, some sample wording that indicates that you might be taking action when you put something in your agenda would be possible motion, possible action on granting $1,000 for the trees on the median. Something that would indicate that you were not taking action would be discussion regarding trees on the median. So you want to make sure that the public knows what items you're actually going to be voting on and what actions you're just up for discussion, so that they can know, even in that sense, whether they need to be there or not. Is it a do or die date for them? Do they need to cancel their, you know, tennis match? Or can they say, well, I'll go to the next meeting, because the next meeting is when it needs to be handled. When you have a meeting that for whatever reason needs to be canceled, if you didn't post it properly or whatever the reason, then you need to make your best efforts to try to let the public know in the same way that you let them know that there was going to be a meeting. So you should try to put it on your website if you have a website. Send out an e-blast if you have that capability. Maybe let Dunn know that your meeting is going to be canceled so that they can notify however they do it. Post it in the same places that you post your agendas, that now the meeting is canceled, so that you are considerate with the stakeholders, and so that they don't show up at the meeting wondering what happened and why is the meeting going to take place or not. If you post an agenda and the deadline for the Brown Act has come and gone, and you realize, oh, I forgot to put something on the agenda that should be on there, you can't just come to the meeting with a revised agenda and say, ladies and gentlemen, here's our new agenda. We're going to have, we left some things off of our agenda that we posted, and so here's the new one. We're going to be talking about items F and G as well. Because you're not complying with the Brown Act when you give out that notice right then and there at the meeting. So any revised agenda needs to also comply with the Brown Act timeframes and has to be posted according to the bonk policy. And you need to be clear that it's a revised agenda so that people are not confused with whether it's supposed to be Agenda A or Agenda B when they get to the meeting. Remember that you can't take any action on items that aren't on the agenda. If somebody comes to the meeting and wants to bring up something that's not on the agenda, then the proper place for them to do that would be in the general public comments, where they can make a brief statement or brief presentation with whatever your time limitations are on whatever the issue is. But the board cannot take any action on it, can't vote on it, and is limited to being able to simply say, okay, we'll try to get that on the next agenda so that you can post it within Brown Act timeframes. There's an exception to that, of course, and that's when everybody, when 2/3 of the neighborhood council agrees that it's something that the board has to take immediate action on and that they couldn't have known about it earlier. So, but if you're faced with any kind of situation like that, you need to call the city attorney's office first so that you can make sure that it really is something that would fit that exception, so that you don't get into trouble with a Brown Act violation. I have attached a little checklist, or not a checklist, but a quick hits that kind of tells you what wording should and what information should be on your agendas and how samples of how it could be worded. So that should be of help to you, and if it's not, feel free to send me a copy of your agenda if you have a question about it. But remember, you have to do it where you give me enough time to get it back to you, where you'll have posting for within the Brown Act timeframe. I see a question over there.
The other question, you mentioned that an item could be included if 2/3 of the council agreed to include it.
Yes.
As sort of an emergency.
Yes.
Where would that 2/3 agreement happen if not in the actual room of the meeting? Because then wouldn't it be a serial meeting if it were to happen anywhere else outside of that actual meeting?
It would.
So let's say I have an agenda that went out the day before. There's an issue that happened. And let me just. All right, so I will sound the same. Let's say my agenda goes out 72 hours. An event happens the day before we are to meet. It's an urgent matter that the board should see. If I send out an email to the rest of the board members, isn't that a serial meeting if we decide to put it on the agenda and are discussing that topic?
Let me just kind of address it or bring up this issue. Alois mentioned this exception about the ability to take action on the item at the meeting, because that exception exists. You should know that it is there. But you should also be aware that the circumstances under which you could likely exercise that option to then be at the meeting and say, okay, we are going to consider this issue, are extremely remote and rare, all right? There may have been, in the course of the 10 years that I've been doing this, one situation that I can think of that was appropriate to do it, all right? There hasn't been another case since then. The problem with this issue is, remember, The 2/3 is of the full board, all right? You don't necessarily need to send the communication out to the board members before that meeting that this issue came up, all right? It would come up right there, and you'd say, you know, I just have been made aware of this issue. I believe that this exception applies, so we're going to take it on. And I have talked with the Office of the City Attorney, and they've confirmed that we're able to take this issue up at this time. All right, so that's how it would be. That's how it would be presented. It wouldn't be presented until the time of the meeting. The remedy or the fix, though, for addressing this. And then I want to just wrap this question up. I want to do the facilitation real quick because we only have a couple minutes, and we do have a time set for question and answer. But the way to remedy this problem that you addressed is they're usually at least before the regular meeting, you usually find out about it at least 24 hours beforehand, right? This big urgent issue that came up. All you need to do is tack a special meeting at the end of your regular meeting. Get out your agenda that says, whatever that urgent issue was, following the regular meeting. You know, this special meeting will follow the regular meeting at such and such time. That's how you address these issues that come up at the last minute, and that's how you've made sure that you get that notice out, so that way people have the notice. Don't try to use this 2/3 exception because you're going to get caught up in it. One last quick point about that. The reason why it's really ineffective for you to use it is they impute the knowledge of the whole city to you. So let's say, for example, you just learned about this project that is coming up for hearing at the APC tomorrow. Well, the city knew about it for a long time before that. So it's not an emergency. Even though you think that for your purposes it is, it's not going to be treated as an emergency under the Act. And virtually every single time that people have tried to use this exception, the courts have set it aside. So it's mentioned, but don't use it. Get around it using that special notice to tack it on. I want to just kind of follow up, though, with some facilitation tips or tools that we talked about. You know, prior to the meeting, we addressed a number of issues here, and all of them involve kind of, you know, we've set the stage now for a meeting. We've given that introduction. We've told people what to expect, how they can contribute. We've been able to then do an agenda and write out an agenda. It answers the agenda items, answer the basic information: who, what, when, where, why, what. Okay? If you can write something that answers all those questions for you, then you've probably complied with the Brown Act in putting out that description. All right? You've posted it on your website, you've posted it in your physical location, you've sent it to Dunn. Now you can finally have your meeting. Okay? You're at the meeting, you get there, and you're dealing with these issues about you know, bullying, improper behavior during the meeting. I'm going to do this because I want to kind of keep us on time. Now, there are a number of tools that you can use that you should be aware of that you have available at your disposal. When you're dealing with your board with members of the public, you know, one of the things that you may want to try is if you're finding that you have this disruption going on, is you start incrementally. Okay, one of the things that you may want to do is you may want to have video recording of your meeting. You know, what people are gonna like, okay, now in the area of YouTube, who wants to show up on YouTube acting a fool? All right? That kind of helps people behave a little bit, all right? If that's not working, then you have to start being harder on your rules and treating the rules with fairness, setting the parameters so everybody understands what happens in this situation. You know, sometimes you have to be a little bit mean as a chair, and sometimes you're going to catch it. Sometimes, you know, people are not going to be happy with you all the time, but don't take it personal. You know, look at your successes. I got us through the meeting, all right? And your board members will understand this. They understand, like, okay, they got us through the meeting, thank goodness. Now, you know, just in terms of addressing people, sometimes you're going to have a difficult person. You're going to have an incredibly difficult person. But, you know, you try the tools with, okay, we have you on video recording. You know, we're putting our meetings up on our web so people are seeing them. But I'm still dealing with this person who doesn't yield the floor, okay? Now, if you're having a hard time with them, granted, the other members of the public are also having a hard time with them, and so are members of the board, all right? But what you do is you then start escalating your response, all right? If that person is not, you've treated them fairly, okay? So they shouldn't be angry anymore. They see that everybody's getting 2 minutes. There's not any person that's getting more. You know, everything's fair. Okay, thank you for your comments. We've concluded that. You as a board, you do not need to engage in a debate with members of the public. All right, thank you for your comment. All right, why escalate it? Why escalate it into an argument? They've provided the comment. Thank you. We'll digest that during our board member discussion. We'll talk about it. All right. So when the person is done with their comment, your 2 minutes are up. Thank you. I've already given you the warning. Your 2 minutes are up. Thank you. If you don't yield the floor, I'm going to remind you of the warning that I gave at the beginning that you're disrupting our meeting, and I'm going to call a peace officer. All right. Your 2 minutes are up. Please yield the floor. All right. You can do it in a manner where, all right, they're gonna yield it. If you're still having problems with them, then you put these big signs up, all right, in your meeting so everybody can see. And I'll hand these up also, all right? You can blow them up as big as you want. Trespass warning, removal. You mess up our meeting and you're gonna get, you're gonna get arrested, all right? If you're having that situation with someone who's so disruptive that you think that you have these tools in place. You have the video, you've set the parameters for the rule, you know how people should behave, all right? They're still doing it, you're having a hard problem. Before calling the peace officers, one thing you may want to try, and this works. You get up from the table and you say, we're having a 5-minute recess. All right? All your board members, y'all walk out the room. 5-minute recess. Okay? Come back. The person still does it. 5-minute recess. All right? Now, after a point, yes, they may be trying to, they may find it funny, like, okay, I'm doing it. But the thing is that you're setting the parameters showing that this person is disrupting your meeting, okay? So now when you come back and you have this thing, like this person doesn't yield the floor when their time is up, all right? You have a stronger case for then engaging in that final action of having somebody come and physically remove them, having a police officer come and remove the person from the meeting. The thing is that you shouldn't ever get to that point, okay? Try some of these other tools in place before escalating it to that situation so that, you're firm with them. They feel like they've been treated fair. You didn't let people boo. I'm going to remind you, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, we treat all our speakers with respect. We're not going to boo or hiss, all right? So people then, they don't feel that situational discrimination. They don't feel that they've been treated unfairly. They've had the same opportunity as everybody else. They're not likely to get incensed and to act out at you. So when you ask them, your 2 minutes are up, please yield the floor. They probably, okay, let me just wrap up. They want to sneak in a little bit. They're going to sneak in a few words, and then they'll say, okay, thank you. I'll go sit down now, all right? Thank you for your comment. So that's how you can address this issue. You don't have to let this matter escalate. You don't have to sit at your dais and start yelling with the members of the public and get in an argument with them like, no, you're wrong, no, you're wrong. It doesn't go anywhere. Well, thank you for your comment. Okay, now you're ready to deal with the issues among and between your board, all right? So let's say that you're having that same type of problem. Remember, it's the same situation that everybody is in. They all want to feel a sense of fairness, okay? So if they're all provided the same opportunity, if you're having the problem with the board member who's just monopolizing the conversation, then you adopt board rules that say every board member has 2 minutes time on each subject too, okay? And you tell them at the beginning of the meeting when you're doing your script, everybody has 2 minutes. And then as the chair, it's like, okay, your 2 minutes are up now, yield the floor, all right? Now for board members, if they continue being disruptive, they have more significant ramifications for their behavior because that can actually be a basis then for removal. So, but if you start putting these rules in place and you make your board members aware of it, you stick to that script, that introduction, so that people understand what the baseline is, what the framework is for operating in the confines of this meeting, you're going to find that people will follow it and they'll adhere to it. So learn your rules. Attend the in-person trainings. I think that they're much more effective. I know it's hard to get places. It's wonderful on the internet, but unfortunately we haven't been able to tailor this into something that's so internet ready. I hope with our video we'll be able to have some of this more readily available, but do try to do that. We have these ethics. Learn your rules, learn your bylaws. Are we going to do a short question and answer, or are we moving to?
Yeah, so what I was thinking is, go ahead. I'll just cut mine real short. This is probably more.
So let's just do like a question and answer. We'll do like what, 5-10 minutes?
Yeah, 5
Okay, so I'll let Lisette, you go through and gather the.
Okay, can I get the first three? So I got Miss Carson, I got Michelle, and Mr. Montes, okay?
Hi, I just wanted to get clarification on agendas. So just the 1 or 2 pages is necessary, not the attached motions. That complies with?
Correct.
Okay. And posting on the website is now part of meeting the 72-hour?
Yeah, correct. For your regular meeting, for your board or committee meetings, you've got to get your website posting done, your physical posting done, and get your agendas done within the time, within that 72-hour time frame, if it was a regular board or committee meeting.
And then when there are extra materials, like especially for a planning committee, when those materials are sent to the committee, they're done by Dropbox because they're they're PDF files that are too large or JPEGs. Several stakeholders have mentioned that it's intimidating to them. They don't have all the materials. They feel kind of shy to ask. They don't really know that they can ask. What would you recommend could help them feel more empowered and involved with issues? Because they show up, there's no printed agenda.
Well, and this is a recommendation, all right? There's not a requirement, but if you could try to put those materials on your website so that when you have the link on your agenda, they can click on it and they can see it. They're not intimidated then by making the request for the information. If you don't, then if you can't do that, then at least check that the planning may have it, because some of this information is also available on planning if you know the like the council file number or the number that it's filed under. So even if you're not able to put it on your website, you still may be able to provide some of this other information as a link that you have on your agenda.
Yes, the question that I have, so let's say we do that. We do the YouTube video recording, then we do the, be a little bit harder on the rules and do the reminder, and, we follow the procedure. But we have a board member that turns around and says, Madam Chair, would you be so kind, and can I ask that stakeholder a question? Or can we vote to drop our rules to listen to what this stakeholder has to say? What happens there? If that one board member is wanting to hear what that stakeholder that's being the bully to us.
Well, and you're the chair. I'm assuming you're the chair of the meeting.
No, I'm not.
Okay, well,
I'm the treasurer.
Well, remember, the chair has a lot of discretion, okay, in running the meeting. So even when there is a time limit on people, the chair does have some ability to say, I'm going to give you a short amount of time to conclude your statements, all right? But let's say that you're saying that somebody on the board is trying to egg on a member of the public, and is that the situation?
No,
or?
A board member wants the stakeholder to have more time to clarify the behavior that he has.
So the chair,
or she has.
So the chair will decide. All right. If I was the chair, I would. There's a lot of factors that I don't know in response to your question, and it's not necessarily a legal question, but it's a how am I going to be able to more effectively chair this meeting? If I allow this person the time, then all the other people are going to be mad because now I'm treating somebody unfairly. So I'd likely remind the board member that just asked me, I'm going to remind you that we have a 2-minute time limit. We have a number of people here present in the meeting. It would be unfair to the other people that didn't have that opportunity to expend. We have a lot of items on our agenda tonight, and we need to get through it.
Thank you.
That's how I would respond as a chair. But it's the chair's discretion. Okay? So I could say, I agree with you. I'm going to allow this person a number of it. But then as a chair, I realize, okay, now I've created a situation that could cause this unfairness then. So then maybe what you could do is, all right, I'll allow this person, and since Lisette appeared to present the opposite view of this, I'll allow her also another 2 minutes, so that you try to keep at least some type of balance. Otherwise, if you throw that off, you have people getting irate.
Yeah, my question is regarding the agenda setting of the executive committee for the board meeting.
Okay.
Because obviously there's limited time on the board. There's 20, 30 issues, many priorities. So it could be contentious as to what agenda items get on the board, or could be delayed. So we set our agenda in the executive committee for the board meeting. Can you talk about the process for that? And also I want to add the standard things that we always have: the finance report, the minutes, a guest speaker, a community group. So my question is, talk about the process for setting the agenda for the board meeting. Do we have to vote on every item? What do we vote on? We don't vote. What is standard?
Well,
what is not standard?
There isn't necessarily a legal answer to your question, because the answer is more along the lines of what does your executive committee want to do? You know, if your bylaws create that situation where the agenda is created through the executive board, then you have to follow that executive board approval process in order to have the items listed on the agenda. There's some exceptions to that, but that's generally the process that you must adhere to. Your question seems, though, to deal more with being able to either get fewer things on the agenda for the meeting, or being able to consolidate issues to a greater extent. Is that maybe you need to employ? I'm going to recommend or suggest to you that we talk to you kind of outside of this presentation, so that we could just get a sense of what you're trying to accomplish. Because there's probably a way to help you or assist you, and I'm only getting very general information right now that it's hard to respond to your question or what the concern is.
The bylaws is very general. Executive committee will set the agenda.
Then that's the rule. Yeah, then that's the rule.
Okay, but I mean, we have 10 different issues, limited time.
So then that's a matter then where you have to kind of deal with that group dynamic and how you work with other people and how issues, how you advocate that your issues get put on the board while being respectful in the context of that meeting. Because it's your executive board decision then. Do we want to have big, long meetings? Do we want to have short meetings? Your board has to kind of decide that. It's not necessarily a legal issue on it.
So there's going to be an opportunity for a roundtable after Hector does his presentation. And then, so, you know, Alois, Darren, and Hector will be up here answering your questions at that point. I do, before I have Hector come up, I want to just do two things. One is I really want to thank Hector and the Alliance of River Communities and Alois and Darren for this partnership. This is really something and thank you all, really. I mean, this is awesome. The attendance here is absolutely awesome. You guys should be really proud of your region. And with that, I just want to introduce, for all of you who already know her, Miss Gracie Liu. She's our general manager.
Hello. I just wanted, again, to reiterate what Lisa just said. Get it right out of my mouth. That really want to appreciate you being here. The learning curve for being a board member is quite steep for some of you who are nodding your heads, and we appreciate that you are here to try to mitigate that. And of course, we appreciate our partners, Darren, Alois, Hector, and our wonderful staffer, Lisette. And if you didn't know, Savak and Aaron are here recording as well. And we have, actually, he was here earlier. One of our co-chairs for the Budget Advocates was also here as well, Jay Handel. But please, again, feel free to always follow up with any questions. No stupid questions here. Call us up, NC Support. We're always here to help you and support you in any way we can. So thank you again.
Were you all set?
No, you're just...
Great. Okay, so let's give our city attorneys a round of applause, please, because
Thank you.
bylaws and agenda setting is very heady materials, and I know that a lot of people in this room have read what the correct processes are, have read the literature on how to do these things correctly, and sometimes because it's so thorough and so detailed, it may not really click on how it affects everybody on the ground. So Darren's sort of segue into agenda setting and parliamentary procedure works out nicely because as someone who's served on neighborhood councils and continues to work with the Alliance, there are some very on-the-ground ways that agenda items affect the way that your meetings will go. So what I have is just 2 slides that I hope are going to change your lives, okay? And we're gonna save questions for the end, unless it's, oh, there's no handout for this, but if you did sign up, you did not forget to sign up, we will email it to you. But let's get right into it. And before we start about parliamentary procedure, let's just talk a little bit more about agendas and how they pertain to your work as board members and as leaders in your neighborhoods. It's important to understand that there are different types of agenda items. And there's primarily, they all kind of fall into three groups. Okay, the first group is an informational item. This is something that you're not gonna make a decision on. This is someone that you might invite to your board to present to your stakeholders, and they bring information, they bring a resource, and you leave it at that. There's no action taken. There's not a whole lot behind this type of agenda item. Another type of agenda item is a problem-solving item, okay? These are typically the types of agenda items where if you don't have a working group or a committee or a group of people that have not sort of already discussed or worked on what the appropriate action to take is, you probably don't want this at your full board meeting. At your full board meeting, you want to set an agenda and you want to make decisions on the items that you post for the public and for your board to see. But if you spend the majority of that time locked up onto figuring out the details of one complicated land use issue or one complicated piece of LA City ordinance, it's going to take a huge amount of time away from your board meeting, and it's often something that can be avoided if you agree to send it to committee or start with a working group first, so that when it's ready, when it's a little bit more fully baked, it's an item that comes to the board with some detail, with some additional information as to why you recommend that the board make a specific decision, okay? And this is gonna make a big difference with the flow of how your meetings go with a parliamentary procedure. Thanks. So the very last thing, and maybe the most important thing, what you definitely want on your agendas are decision-making items. These have to occur at full board meetings. I don't think there's any neighborhood council in our region that gives, say, their land use committee the ability to just decide on an issue. No one does that. For these, you want to hear out stakeholder comments if you've already worked them out in group. You want them at the full board meetings. You want a mostly fully or mostly developed idea or plan by a working group or a committee. And you want to come to a decision on it. You don't want to lock it up in additional deliberation. You want to be ready to vote. And if this item has gone through the committee process, and if it's been vetted through other meetings or other working groups, by the time it gets to the full board, everyone should have the information in front of them and be ready to say, okay, you know what, I like this idea. I wasn't sure about it at first, but I see the process. I see what the working group has done. I'm going to support it, or I'm still against it. But by this point, everyone should more or less be ready to make a decision, and that's what you've all been elected to do. Make decisions, have a stance on issues, and actually communicate your stance, communicate the concerns of the neighborhood to our paid elected officials. So with that, understanding that those are three types of agenda items, let's talk about the actual parliamentary procedure, okay? And let's say you don't have to hang out there anymore. I can keep an eye on it. Yeah, that's fine, thank you. Okay, so all different boards in their bylaws pretty much dictate what parliamentary procedures they use. Some people use Robert's rules, some people use Rosenberg's rules, and then there's all kinds of variations. Our own city council, they have their own rules. They've made up their own rules for how they do things, and you know, they're outlined, but they're very specific to the city. Neighborhood councils can do that as well. I wouldn't encourage it, but it all falls down into these 4 steps. And this was developed and simplified to be general, but still useful for you all to use. This is something that you all can take with you to your meetings, can keep these steps in front of you, and use them for your decision making. This may not always work if you're in a committee or in a working group and you're working out the details of a very complicated issue. Earlier, someone had a question about following the Brown Act, or excuse me, following parliamentary procedure during a committee meeting that may be made up of a mix of stakeholders and board members. There's sort of different expectations for their understanding of parliamentary procedure if it's a mix of people. So at committee meetings, it might be recommended that you're a little bit looser with parliamentary procedure, but because the full board meeting is a Brown Acted meeting with all board members ready to make a decision, you want to follow these steps, not just because it's the rules, but parliamentary procedure exists so that there's a transparent process for how business gets done. The very first step, however your neighborhood council does it, the item needs to come before the board. Some neighborhood councils will introduce an agenda item that says discussion and possible action. Other neighborhood councils take it a step further and they say, no, we're only going to accept agenda items that say motion to oppose, motion to support, very specific. How your boards do that is entirely up to you all. There's different best practices for that. But the point is that this item, this issue, when it's agendized, you all need to have a way to bring it before your board. The typical way is an item is introduced, the chair reads it, someone moves to hear it, someone seconds it, and then it's in front of you. It's ready to discuss. Once it's in front of you, once it's on the floor, the second step is a discussion. And that word discussion is very tricky because discussion doesn't mean, hey, let's chat about this. What do you think? I agree, I disagree. That's not exactly how discussion works in parliamentary procedure. In discussion, the expectation is that all board members are at least a little bit well-versed on the issue, and they have time to make a statement on what they feel their concerns are or why they support it or why they oppose it. It's not an opportunity for another board member to say, no, that's wrong, you're incorrect, and to interrupt. A discussion is actually just a series of statements. And if your board is very orderly, then the chair will sort of guide that discussion and give everyone an opportunity to be heard, okay? So at this point, we have an item that's before the table, and individual board members are making statements about that item, but we're not exactly sure if an action is going to be taken yet or not. No one's necessarily made a motion. So a motion, just to remind everyone, is a recommendation on a specific action. So while you are all discussing, while people are making their statements, someone at some point is going to be ready to say, I move that we approve this letter to the planning department. And that's the very specific motion that is before the board. That is exactly the only thing that the board can vote on at that moment. And the discussion needs to be limited to just that specific item. So it's really important for the chair to understand that, to follow the process of what's going on, and to make sure that everyone's comments relate only and specifically to that motion. At this point, like I mentioned, you can give limited time to each board member to speak on the issue. You can give members the floor, which means sometimes you'll let them, if there's, for example, an expert, like a planning expert in the community that has a specific stance. In a situation like that, the chair may decide, okay, during your statement, when we're doing board discussion, you can pose a question to the expert that is there presenting. And you can give every board member an opportunity to have their questions heard or at least get some responses or some clarification. But it's important to just sort of control that and keep everyone on track. Once discussion is over, the third step that you can take for every time you're going to make a decision, anytime the board is going to make a decision, is to hear out public comment. Okay, and from hearing some of the concerns earlier, this particular piece gets a lot of gets sort of heated during lots of board meetings that I've been to, that maybe you all have been a part of. During public comment, you can explain this process to your stakeholders. You can let them know before we're going to make any decision, before we're actually going to vote on a decision, the public is going to get a chance to weigh in on it. And this is the opportune time for them to do that. It's allowable for all actions that the board may take, and it lets stakeholders weigh in on the very specific decision that you're about to make. It's not an opportunity for someone to make a public comment and talk about something completely different or talk about a separate aspect of the item that you're discussing, because that would be out of order. You want to limit it to the very specific action that the board is about to take. And the very last step is actually to vote. This is why we're all elected. Be ready to make decisions, stand for or stand against things. But there are some best practices that you can take when you actually do the vote. And lots of times it really depends on the chair of the board or the committee to lead this process. You can repeat the motion. Ask for a roll call vote so that you ensure you get everyone's vote. Announce the vote totals, because sometimes the public isn't always following. You can let know what the total vote count was and announce if the motion passes or fails. Okay? This is something that you all can have at all of your meetings and explain to folks, this is going to be the step that we take for every single decision that we make. And in the situation where someone introduces a motion and there's a bit of discussion and someone decides to complicate things a little bit and introduce, say, a substitute motion, you follow the same step for that specific item, and depending on the outcome of that, you would follow these same steps again after that vote to the original items. Motions are handled in the opposite order that they're made. So someone makes motion 1, someone makes motion 2, someone makes a third completely different motion. You have to handle motion 3 first, motion 2 second, and motion 1 last. So that's the parliamentary process. So without going into Robert's rules, Rosenberg's rules, and any of the other sort of specific tools that are part of parliamentary procedure, generally speaking, this is something that you can share with the public so they also understand what your process is going to be, and hopefully it will also deter them from interrupting or messing up that process. But also, you can share it with them and let them know, look, this is how the board operates, this is how we work. If you want to be an effective stakeholder that is still very proactive with the board, help us get through these steps. You can contribute to the decision-making process by doing some of the committee work, doing some of the group work, understanding that you're going to get a chance to speak on every decision. Don't yell out or blurt when we're in the middle of discussion. Everyone's going to get a chance to make a public comment on every action that we take. Those are 2 slides for parliamentary procedure. Great. Oh, questions? Yeah, we can do that.
Thank you. I was over there doing stuff that I need to do, so I didn't hear the first. Are we going to get copies of that? Is that you going to email it to us, or? Go ahead.
It's on. Well, it will get emailed to everyone who signed up.
Here, you want me to? Okay, right. Go ahead.
My question is, in the process, I think it sounds very effective to have the motion be brought up as motion to approve or motion to not approve, but who gets to make that distinction? And then does that, if the chairperson's bringing up the motion and says it to approve or to disapprove, does that take him away from being impartial in facilitation of that meeting? So how do we avoid the the sort of, coming off as partial to a resolution if it hasn't been discussed yet by the board.
Okay, so most bylaws are have some sort of language in there about the chair of a meeting maintaining impartiality, because his role is to ensure that everyone is heard. In particular, his role is also to ensure that people of the minority opinion are not just steamrolled by people of the majority opinion, okay? Which is exactly why it's important for chairs to maintain impartiality. But depending on your bylaws, different bylaws will say, because of this impartiality rule, our chair is not allowed to vote. Or some bylaws will read, because of this impartiality rule, our chair is not allowed to participate in discussion. Okay, so it's very specific to each individual neighborhood council. With enough practice, I would say, a chair is able to still participate in the discussion, give their opinion, cast their vote, as long as the rights of other board members, so to speak, are still protected, and he or she is still sort of giving everyone the opportunity to be heard on a specific item. So that probably doesn't directly answer your question, but it really just depends on your bylaws. And then it also depends on, this is why we sort of talked about how agenda items affect the flow of a meeting. If someone on the board has a recommendation for the decision or the action that the board should take, they may want to just outright in the agenda say, motion to approve this specific thing. And you know where that person stands, you know where that vote is headed. But when the recommendation isn't very clear and it's just sort of discussion or action on whatever issue, then you need to count on the chair of that meeting to give his or her 2 cents, but also ensure that he or she isn't controlling the conversation or trying to sway things in either direction. And when that does happen, it's one of those difficult things that you sort of have to address as a board.
My question for this particular part also has to do with community impact statements. In our neighborhood council, we have right now new people, brand new to the entire NC, and they're learning the system from scratch. And so how can we help them learn the system and implement that for not only for agendas, but also for community impact statements, if they only have, for example, just handouts to go by?
So you can help them, and you help yourselves, and you help new board members, and you even help veteran board members when you're consistent with your process. And that's part of the reason why I tried to keep this as simple as possible, even though it's very easy to add more layers. But if you show up to every board meeting and you say, for every single meeting, we're gonna bring an item before the board, we're gonna discuss it in a very orderly process, we're gonna hear public comment, and then we're gonna make a decision, and that's the process that the chair commits to, then it's constantly being reinforced that this is the good practice, this is the way we keep order, and this is the way we get through our agendas faster.
So I'm going to take 2 more questions because I know they're going to have a roundtable. So folks who didn't get to ask questions now, I'm going to ask the city attorney. But I wanted to ask you all first. After these 2 questions, Rio will be the last one. Do you all want to take a break and then do the roundtable, or do you just want to go into the roundtable? Oh, wow. Okay, great. So here you
I just have some quick questions about the committees. How does the parliamentary procedure apply to committee meetings? And can the community come to these committee meetings? And do you have to have a board person to chair the committee meetings?
So every individual neighborhood council sort of determines how committees are formed and who can chair them and how they're made up. I know some neighborhood councils have very specific rules. This committee can only have 2 board members, and there can only be 4 voting community members. Some are much more broad. So the answer, again, I'm sorry, is it depends on your neighborhood council's bylaws. But if your question is about how to keep order during committee meetings, the first thing is understand it's not going to be like a full board meeting, because chances are, especially if it's, say, a land use committee, you're working on some very detailed and complicated issues that in some cases, so you're going to have some community members that get it, understand it, maybe it's part of their profession or their background, and in other cases, you're going to have to sort of walk them through the process and, you know, at least give them an opportunity to be heard. But you can still have effective meetings if you follow a similar process, and it's, you know, introduce the issue, keep people focused on the specific issue, and my general recommendation for committees is don't work towards a final action necessarily. Don't work towards something super specific, but do sort of work towards a recommendation to the board. At the end of whatever item you're discussing in committee, everyone should be clear, this is what we're going to recommend that the neighborhood council do. This is what we're going to tell them to do. This is our recommendation, and we want them to take action on it. If that is the outcome, if that is the expected outcome for every agenda item on a committee meeting, you'll have effective meetings, even if they're a little looser and a little more free with how people actually dialogue and interrupt each other, because there's sort of no controlling that in committee meetings. I'll just say it. Just have to go with it. Hopefully practice enough where you keep guiding people towards some sort of recommendation, but it's okay if it, you know, goes off track a little bit.
Yeah, my question was around, just kind of in a nutshell, what would be the difference in the language between saying motion to versus discussion and or possible action? Like, I'm wondering if one hinders us from doing something and the other one doesn't. So I don't know if that might be a legal question, but I'll just answer it in my experience as a board member. Whenever I proposed a motion to support a certain thing, it's because I brought in my own agenda or the agenda of the people that I was working with, and that is what I thought was in the best interest of the community, and I wanted to be very clear to everyone, this is the direction I want to take this, and this is the recommended action. We've done the work, we've vetted it, this is how our neighborhood feels, etc. When things are a little more complicated or you know, there's some uncertainty, it's okay to put motion and possible action, because that communicates to the public, look, this is the item that we're going to discuss, and we're probably going to make a decision on it. That's what motion and possible action means. So it's really just what the best practice of the board is. There are some situations where you'll have an agenda item where you don't know what the decision that the board should make is, but just because of timing, a decision has to be made that night. At that point, you may want to leave it open-ended, because it may take a little bit of board discussion to figure out, okay, this is what we're going to recommend that we do, and you might not list specifically what you want the motion to be.
So folks, at this point, we're going to open questions also to Alois, and Darren's walking in. So I have Mr. Bowers first, then Mackie. I saw another young woman with her hand up. Your name, ma'am?
So I very much appreciate your presentation, and I want to echo the sentiments of the gentleman in yellow. It's very difficult for people who've been on a board to sustain the learning curve and the commitment that it takes, which often results in people, after the term is over, leaving, and then the transition is a brand new learning curve for a new set of people. And I just want to say, as a former teacher, people have different styles of learning, and I would recommend to this, who's talking up there? Could you please listen? I would recommend that instead of explaining how this is done, if you would provide some simple YouTube videos where people could have the opportunity to watch a functioning meeting so that we could observe how a meeting works when it's working right, instead of trying to extrapolate from a handout like my friend over here said, I think that would be very effective, because I could explain the rules of baseball to you, but if you've never seen a baseball game for the first time, you're going to get out there and you're going to not know what's going on. So in this day and age of YouTube, as you mentioned very appropriately, I think it would be very effective to have some opportunities for people to simply observe, learn how meetings that function and run the way you're explaining to us they should. That would be great.
This young lady here just had a quick comment on that, and then I'll get to Mackie and more.
I think that's a great idea. However, as you've mentioned, different people have different learning styles, and as somebody who has real problem with visual media like that, I really appreciate having the handouts, because I learned by reading, and I think that we should look at various different styles, including group meetings like this, including YouTube type videos, and including handouts. Thank you.
I want to just make a statement about that. There are actually some training videos on Dunn's website that has that on it already. So feel free to look at those if you want to go through their website.
Hi, Maki from Round Park Village Neighborhood Council. As board members, we are finding ourselves like we're navigating in rough waters when someone is challenging a motion that was been passed and seconded. So if that happens, what would you recommend?
So if someone's being disruptive, I think...
Not necessarily disruptive, but when the motion was passed and seconded, and then someone is challenging the motion, like for example, specifically when the motion is to pass a certain agenda item, and then it was seconded, and then there's another person saying, let's not, I move that we don't, he's basically questioning the second motion. So he's actually making a motion to table it. So what would you recommend under this situation?
So this is a common part of parliamentary procedure. Typically, the people who understand and practice parliamentary procedure the most and often will have the upper hand, because they understand the rules and they understand sort of the details. And if your bylaws specifically say we're going to follow Rosenberg's rules of order for our meetings, someone very well versed in Rosenberg's rules is, of course, in a position where he could very much take advantage of that if no one else is. So the first answer to your question is know your bylaws and actually do a little bit of deeper reading than just sort of following these couple of steps. Understand your rules of order a little bit. And I know that the EmpowerLA website has some really good resources for very easy rules of order. We may make those available in the email also. We could just send them out or send out a link. But what you mentioned, Mackie, is actually, what you're saying is a board member is exercising their right under parliamentary procedure to recommend a suggested action. And that is actually protected. That's why parliamentary procedure exists. That's why we take care of items in that specific order, descending order first, because the last motion made, it goes back to this. How is the motion introduced to the board? If someone makes a motion and it's seconded by someone else, then you go to discussion and you actually have to take a vote on it. And if that motion is to postpone an item, then that board member has their elected power to bring that to discussion. So if it keeps happening on the same agenda item, I mean, they're out of order. So once a decision has been made, you move on to whatever the next item. You know, if it's the motion before that or whatever it is, but there's no doing it 2 or 3 times. If they want to make that motion for every agenda item, you're going to have to deal with it for every agenda item. But once it's been decided that no, we're not going to postpone this item, then you go on to actually making a decision.
I'm the chair of our land use committee, and when I'm just newly elected, you know, been on the board a couple months. I thought that when I got elected, my role was to represent the views of the community. But what do you do when a community is very adamant that they don't want any development, but the committee feels that actually it's a very responsible development that is being proposed, but the community is just adamantly, I mean, and then they feel like you're not being fair and they're not being heard if you vote to support the development?
There's no other answer than you want to encourage all of your committee members and all of your board members to vote the way that they feel is right, okay? They took it upon themselves to campaign to get elected, to get people out to vote for them. They're coming to the meetings, they're doing the work in committee, and they're going through the process. And just sort of as a former board member, I understand how you'll have people who feel passionately from your neighborhood, they feel passionately about a certain issue, but they may not have all of the resources or all of the information behind why there may actually be a greater benefit to the decision that you all are making. I would encourage you specifically to tell community members like that to run against you in the next election, okay, and challenge them to do the work, and let them know that you will, you know, that if they get elected or if they want to contribute to the work, you will help them make their decisions. But if your decision is not what they agree with, you should, I recommend to everyone, you vote the way that you think you should vote. That's what you were elected to do.
I'm sorry.
What happened?
Yeah. I was like, what? I'm putting in some work.
They were all parliamentary questions so far, though.
Okay, folks, so yeah, so it's a free-for-all. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So any of these pending questions, items, and then go for it, Mr. Santana.
Yes, it's about joint special committee and general board meeting together, because the committee has stakeholder membership. And so we had it going fine. And then when suddenly the general board lacked quorum, but then the committee still has a quorum, right? So I would like that the committee would still proceed with the discussion of the business and then make recommendation to the general board when there is quorum, or maybe in the future. Is it possible that the committee would be able to discuss the business?
You know, I think the question that you're asking about, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is, you know, sometimes there are situations where your neighborhood council, where you want the board to participate in the committee meeting. And so in that case, what you do is you notice a joint meeting, I'm gonna just abbreviate, a joint meeting of the board and the, whatever it is, XYZ committee, okay? Is this a situation you're referring to? Because this may also go back to an issue that you raised back there. Look, if you have a committee meeting, let's say that you just had Planning Land Use Committee of the XYZ Neighborhood Council, all right? Then board members who are not on that committee, if they go to that meeting, all they can do is sit there as observers. They cannot talk, they cannot provide discussion, they can't be involved in it. They're not on that committee, they're not allowed to participate. But what neighborhood councils do sometimes is they notice that meeting as a joint meeting of the board and committee. And then there's this little asterisk here that says, you know, out of an abundance of caution, this meeting is noticed under the Brown Act as a joint board and committee meeting, so that, you know, but however, this is intended to be a committee meeting, and all future recommendations will be forwarded to the board for a hearing at a later date. Now, let's assume then that during this joint meeting, you lose the quorum of the board, but you still have that of the committee. Yes, that meeting could proceed then. So I'm glad you raised that question, because I wasn't necessarily thinking of this issue when you asked a question before, like, well, the quorum leaving, there is an example where the quorum of the board can leave, but see, the idea here was really that you're having a committee meeting, and it's noticed in this way. That way board members can participate now in the meeting. Okay. So if you go as a board member to this committee meeting, you can provide input, you can provide discussion. You know, you can discuss it just as members of the public have. If it was only noticed as a committee meeting and you're not on that committee, then you can just go and sit there in the room and not say anything.
Right. And then on how about the second scenario, when the committee was able to make a recommendation and the general board is has a quorum, could they vote upon it?
No, no, no. Because remember, the caveat here is this is intended as a committee meeting. All future recommendations from this committee will go forward to the board for a hearing at a future date. Remember, the Brown Act is about notice. So even though you have the full board here at this point in time, and they decide we want to support this project or oppose this project, and you had 21 people of 21, everybody was there, right? You still have to then still put this at the general board meeting agenda for approval. Yeah, technically, yeah, that's already kind of done. You can probably figure out what the board did, but it has only been handled this way at the committee level to allow the board to participate in that way. Remember, it's done this way as a committee project, but committees can't take action, so it has to still go through the board for final approval.
Okay, thank you.
Plus, you wouldn't have given notice to stakeholders that you were going to take action on whatever the recommendation from the committee was, because you wouldn't know what the recommendation from the committee was going to be.
Okay, so the next couple questions are from folks that have already spoken, so I'm going to give Molly the opportunity, and then we'll go with Minor, Alexia, and Ms. Carson. Wait, am I missing anybody? Rio? Okay.
Hi, so I'm newly elected and I live in constant fear of the Brown Act. So I have a question about emailing my executive committee in particular, but I think this would apply to committees in general as well as the entire board. So sometimes I find myself in situations where I have to email some important information that's only applicable to the executive committee, and I sit there with my finger on send, not knowing if I should send it or not. So I was hoping that the legal team would go into this with a little more detail so that it can help me and probably a lot of you understand what we can and can't do with regards to email.
Well, remember the prohibition under the Brown Act, it prohibits serial communications, all right? I'm gonna return back to our example, where our example board was 21, 11 was a quorum. It takes action by a majority of those present at a meeting. So 6 people is the number that could potentially take action on behalf of this board or committee, all right? This is the possible action. Now, your bylaws may be different, all right? So remember, you have to adjust these numbers based on whatever your numbers are. Now, under the Brown Act, it prevents serial communications from a majority, You're not allowed to gain a concurrence of a majority outside of a public meeting. So you can see here with 21, we know, right, if 11 people have talked to each other about an issue coming before the board, that's easy. It's a Brown Act violation. Okay, that's an easy one, all right? Below 6, all right, if five people or less talk about something, never a Brown Act issue. You guys could talk all you want on the board. I'm not talking about the committee, because you have to figure out the rule for the committee too. It's going to be whatever, 5-3, so you have the same issues come up at the committee. But just on the board, it's a board issue. You know, 5 of you can have a blood pact about how you're going to decide an issue, and it's not a Brown Act violation. All right? The concern why we always warn or caution against serial communications is, you know, there's always a sneaky one in that 5 who's like will blab to one more, and then you have the problem. You have a problem then. You have a problem then between 6 and 11 in our hypothetical, right? Now, above 11, I'm telling you, there's a Brown Act. You're in trouble, all right? Between these numbers, I don't know yet if there is one because I can't tell the future, all right? But this is why I caution you against having the communication on these people. Let's assume that 6 people talked about this project and that they were going to oppose it, all right, outside of the meeting. Now, you get to the meeting, it's still those same 6 who show up, and there's 11, you know, you have the quorum. Then it was a Brown Act violation because you had a majority there agreeing outside of the meeting to what the violation was. Now, if I play with those numbers and I adjust it, right? If I say 21 had showed up and it was still the 6, there wasn't a Brown Act violation, okay? So, but because I can't tell the future, all right, I can give you the safe response. You always keep it below here, you'll never have a problem. Between these numbers is like, you're taking a risk, you're taking a chance. Now that kind of gives you the parameters for serial communications. But you also wanted to talk about appropriate types of communications that you can send to individuals. Excuse me. Things like talking with everybody about, are you available for this meeting? That's perfectly fine, all right? Can you attend this meeting? Are you available on this day? That's a perfectly fine example of a meeting. Beyond that, a lot of the communications are going to start presenting issues for you. You know, if you start talking about the substance of an issue, it's a problem. One thing you can do, let's say that you're the chair. You're the chair of your neighborhood council, and you want input from you're charged with drafting the agenda. I'm going to make that assumption. I don't know. You're responsible for drafting the agenda, but you want to get input from your fellow board members, all right? Hey, I want to put this item on the agenda. Please respond to me yes or no if you think that I should add that. But I don't want your substantive comments about what you think about the issue. That's a perfectly fine example of a communication you can send. You can get people's yes or no, I want this on the agenda, but without discussing the topic. So if they say, yes, we should talk about the trees because they help provide shade and it's really a good idea. Wrong, okay? So the answer is, yes, that should be on the agenda. That would be an appropriate type of communication. If it starts going into the substance of the discussion, that's when you start having issues.
So no explanation, no discussion whatsoever, and you're fine.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a number of things. Like you can disseminate information, you know, through your secretary. Let's say you have a matter coming up before the board for a hearing. It's like these planning land use applications. Okay, you can send all that out, but people can't start sending and replying back and forth with one another because now you're talking about the issue. Now other board members are seeing the comments that people are making on that issue. And this includes, and I've had this argument raised before, which was kind of entertaining. You know, the secretary had sent out some articles, and then another board member said, well, I'm going to distribute these articles, right, in response. And it was basically, no, you're trying to engage in a debate through disseminating this information. You have one person that distributes the information for your board, the secretary, and they'll share everything. Everybody else shouldn't be sending things out to people trying to, hey, did you see this article? Because you're still exchanging or interacting in a way to exchange information or communication about an issue. And once you get to that situation where you have a concurrence of your majority, you have a Brown Act violation. You've violated the serial communication rules. You know, I know that, and there was applause beforehand, like, oh, the Brown Act's driving me crazy. One thing I want to just remind you of is this is a good and well-intentioned law, all right? It's the same reason why we get to see our decision makers do things in public. You know, maybe perhaps it's not perfect, but the same way that you look at your decision makers, your stakeholders look at you. You know, they look at you this way. You're the community leaders. You are who is representing them. And they want to be able to participate, and they want to be able to watch you make those decisions. So while it does put some handcuffs on you in some ways, just this is an incredibly important responsibility that you bear toward the members that you're representing. So when you feel down on it, just remember that there is a good reason for it, and people want to watch you and how you decide things.
Can I just add a little bit to that, really quick? Just as a sort of on-the-ground perspective of being brand new on a board or having entirely new people on a board, the board still has to sort of make arrangements for how it does its day-to-day business, and no one should be discouraged from just planning ahead or making things happen, you know, correctly or in a way that's professional. And I think in the times where an issue about serial meetings has come up before, we've always tried to consider, is this something that is just in the part of the regular administration of how we do our work, or is it in fact the public's business? And if it's the public's business, you only want to discuss that at a meeting, at a noticed meeting. If it's sort of the day-to-day planning of getting a meeting off the ground, or organizing an event that's already been approved, and you tell me if I'm wrong or if I violated when I was a board member, then please feel free to do that. Just keep in mind, if it's the public's business, it should be in an open, Brown-acted meeting.
Yeah, and I'll kind of just echo something, because that's also another important issue. Let's say that you're implementing something that the board has already agreed to do. You know, we agreed to plant the trees this weekend on the median on Verdugo, all right? And the board has all agreed to it. Now it's after the meeting, your board has made that decision, right? Well, you can discuss that now with one another. Hey, what time are you gonna come? Are you gonna bring the trees? Make sure we get the water. Yes, effectuating what the board has already agreed to. Now you're not in that confine of an issue. But if it's an issue coming before your board for discussion and action, then, you know, if you see it happening, just send people a reminder. Hey, this might come up before our board. Let's not talk about this now and wait till our meeting.
Mine kind of ties to that, and it's actually two questions, because first I'm thinking about the way that our web page works. Stakeholders can blast the entire board. So the first question is, how do we respond to our stakeholders, especially if there's a question and maybe it's not even on an agenda item? And then who's responsible for responding in that case? Does it come from our chair? Does it come from a particular committee that may be in charge of that? So I guess that's one question, just because it's kind of tied to that. The other is based off of what you said on the committees, or even during our meetings. The committees should be having their meeting. If there's a board member in the room, they have to just kind of sit there and be silent. So does a board member give up their right to public comment or to claim resident or stakeholder status once they are on the board in these committee settings, or even in the actual
Yes.
general board meeting, so they
Yes.
can't give public comment?
Yes. I'll answer that last one first. Yes. Yes. There've been lots of challenges on that in courts, and no, it's a reasonable restriction on the speech given your status. So since you are a board member and you're required to adhere to these other laws, you don't have that right. And remember, it's also a Brown Act issue, because if you notice that meeting only as a committee meeting and there's 5 people in attendance, and now you're the 6th person going in and discussing, and it hasn't been noticed as a board meeting, you're also violating the law. So that's the reason for kind of the restriction. going in, and I got sidetracked now because the first part of the question, remind me again?
We get an email blast.
Stakeholders, all right. Yeah. Remember, your stakeholders are not the ones that are subject to the Brown Act, okay? You can go out and talk with every stakeholder you want to. It's not ever going to raise a Brown Act issue or concern. So you're free to get that input from members of the community. You only have to watch out at those interactions or communications among the board. So that's the only concern. That's your role. Go out there and talk to the community. Get that input, get what you want. It's up to your board to determine how you want to address concerns. Typically, general issues or concerns, you have a chair of your neighborhood council, and I would, as a recommendation, say it's probably the chair's responsibility then to respond to inquiries from the public, but decide how you want to handle it. You don't want to have 8 different responses going out. Yes, it's this way. No, it's that way. Yes, it's this way. Have a consolidated response. So have a mechanism where those types of requests come in and they're forwarded to your secretary and your president for a response. If that's how you want to work it, that's a recommendation. The best way to handle it.
And you need to be careful about having multiple board members joining in on an issue that's been raised by a stakeholder on the internet, on the web. Because then you're discussing and debating and maybe even coming to a consensus, and then you're doing that, you're having a meeting. Even if it's not within 4 walls, and even if it's not at the same time, that the responses are posted, you're still kind of engaging in a meeting. So you have to be careful of that as well when you're looking at social media and postings and how you're responding to stakeholders on issues in a public forum like that.
I still want to ask you a little bit more about, and maybe part of what the young man over there mentioned, because what is the point of board members? Okay, less than a quorum at a committee meeting. They're just going to sit there like dummies. That's one disadvantage. And the advantage is that they have already this information. They're going to take it, and they will probably already have made their decision by sitting there. The other board members won't have that. So what is the point of them being at that meeting?
Well, the point is they're allowed to attend if they would like to. So board members can go to any committee meeting that they would like. If they're not on the committee and it hasn't been agendized as a joint board and committee meeting, they have to sit there like what was the word you used? Dummies. Oh, the dummies. Well, they can sit there and observe. So they're allowed to. It's just an allowable act for them to do. Any others?
Yeah. So you were talking before about chairs being impartial in meetings. And I think it's true in most cases the chairs set the agenda. So whether they are impartial or partial in setting the agendas is not transparent. And you only kind of get a sense of it when you submit motions and they are agendized or not, but you don't know what's happening. So in our case, we regularly get 90-page agendas with the support materials. And even in the support materials are links to look in. And it's clear to me now that a number of board members are not getting through the agendas. It's clear by the comments being or not being made. Some have told me directly. I just picked the couple that interest me. And I find that problematic. So I submitted a motion to the chairs to agendize for discussion and possible action discussing the agendas. And it's in our standing rules that they take input from the board and the community. And I said, let's open it up. Let's get some feedback. And the response was, we're not going to agendize that, but we'll address it in our co-chair report, which of course means no one can respond. And then we were told that all issues, questions for Don or the city attorney, had to go through our chairs. So we're sort of in this kind of stranglehold now. And how does one address that kind of inequity as a board member?
So if you're, how well do you know your bylaws on a scale of 1 to 10?
Pretty good.
Okay. So if your bylaws are in fact so prescriptive that controls like that are written into them, then the only way that I can think of would be to address it in whatever rules or bylaws committee it is that you have, to open up that process a little bit more. But if the situation is more like a couple of people are maybe interpreting the bylaws differently than other board members might be, then there's a concern about this sort of notion that we've touched on a little bit tonight, where every board member should be empowered to, state their opinion and be able to discuss items or bring issues to the board within whatever process exists for your neighborhood council. So it really just depends on how it is that all of that is worded in your bylaws. And some neighborhood councils, as well-intentioned as they've tried to be, have sort of woven these very complicated bylaws that, 1 or 2 neighborhood council generations later, it's difficult to understand what the actual intent of that language is. And neighborhood councils are, almost 12 years old now, so it's very likely that that's been the case for some people. But in a situation like that, without all of the specifics, it may mean having to rework some of the language in your bylaws. If those are in fact the constraints, then they need to be addressed through the process that some previous board had approved. Do you have an add to that?
So just really quickly, folks, I do have a standing list, and we'll get to everyone. I won't do my presentation because obviously we have to meet you where you're at, and this is way more important than leadership, I guess. So Rio's next, then I have Liz, Mercedes, Michelle, Torrin, Mackie, and Mr. Montes. So if there's anyone else, just come and tap me and I'll put your name on there.
Yeah, my question was more about, well, I have a couple questions. One of them is about the attachment. I heard that we don't have to include the attachments when we post the 72 hours, that as long as it's agendized appropriately. But what about when we get to the meeting and somebody says, hey, I didn't read the attachment, so we can't vote on it. How do we correspond to that, or what are the boundaries around that?
Thank you for your comment.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, moving on. Thank you for your comment.
Okay.
You're not required. You're not required to. Your agenda gives the notice. The attachments are. That's exactly what they are. They're attachments. They're supplementary materials, additional information. If somebody says like, well, I didn't have a chance to read the attachment, and they're complaining to you, it's okay. Thank you for your comment.
Oh, great. Okay, great. Yeah, moving on. All right, sounds good. And then the last thing was, it sounded like when Alois, you were presenting, you were saying that for committees where there's only board members, there doesn't need to be an agenda posted. Is that correct?
For certain ad hoc committees.
Oh, for certain ad hoc.
For ad hoc committees that are comprised only of board members.
And what would be the reasoning, just in case a stakeholder asks us, like, why is there no agendas posted for that meeting or whatnot?
Because an ad hoc committee is really usually to advise the president of, something special.
Perfect. Thank you.
Remember, the ad hoc committees have a very specific focus. We're going to appoint Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so, and Miss So-and-so from the board to this committee for a period of 3 months to look into this issue and report back to the board on this date on their recommendations. So ad hoc committees are very, very specific in nature and in focus, and they're only comprised of board members. If you have a non-board member appointed to the ad hoc committee, then it's not an ad hoc committee. It's a standing committee and has to be noticed and agendized.
Even if you call it an ad hoc committee.
Yeah, you could call it blue. It doesn't matter. Ad hoc committee for the Brown Act has a very specific meaning. If you comply with that, you don't have the meeting or notice requirements.
Can I just, Rio, something that you mentioned earlier about the attachments. Some neighborhood councils will have it written into their bylaws where they will not vote to approve a letter, or they will not vote to submit a community impact statement if it's not written out and presented to the board. So that may be a different situation where you will need to have at least one copy at the board meeting. At the meeting. So it just, in situations like that, it depends on your bylaws. But if your question was just about the attachments, then
Before we get to the meeting, basically.
yes.
It was just like attachments before you get to the meeting.
Oh, no. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, as like Darren answered, yeah, thank you for your comment. It's the right response.
I have a couple of things. One is that, just to clarify, that board members who are properly part of a committee can and should have input into the discussions, because I think that there's been some discussion going.
Of course.
It's the board members outside of that committee.
Yes.
My main question has to do with the subcommittees of those committees. Are those also governed by the Brown Act, especially when they are made of 2 or 3 people and are?
Yeah. You're going into a very difficult area when you're having subcommittees of the committees, because you're getting to such a small number that you're really handcuffing yourself. What neighborhood council are you with?
Historic Highland Park.
Highland Park. Well, we'll talk about it maybe offline. Give you some suggestions or recommendations, because having subcommittees of a committee, there's probably something that we can help you to do better, that you may not need that aspect of it. But as you can imagine, if you're already down to 6 and you have a 5-person committee, then if they're taking action by a majority, then your subcommittee is already down to 2. So you're getting into a really. Let's talk offline to figure out how we can help.
My name is Mercedes. I'm new elected Rampart Village Neighborhood Council. I'm just learning, okay? And I always have 2 different interpretations from the stakeholder and from our chairman. So I'm always have problems. Even in my dream, I have a nightmare. So which one I'm going to follow? I'm willing to be corrected, okay? So my first question is, okay, the conflict of interest. The chairman appointed me as an ad hoc committee, and then at the same time, I am a chairman for the budget. So the stakeholder said it cannot be because it's a conflict of interest, because I'm the one who is planning all this event, all the prices, and then I'm the one who is approving for the budget committee. So is it a conflict of interest?
Let's go. Let me give a little bit of information or advice. When we provide conflict of interest advice, we provide that to you in your personal capacity. I'm not trying to ignore your question, but it's more appropriate that we address this question that you're raising in a confidential way. I don't want to share your information with everybody here, and we try to keep that advice confidential. So contact Alois with the information, and she can then give you the information or analyze whether it's a situation. We don't respond to conflict of interest questions publicly because we're trying to keep your conflict of interest advice confidential to you. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Hello. Okay, so I have a question, and just to clarify at the beginning, it's not written in the bylaws, so there's nothing about it at all in my bylaws. I am the chair of my neighborhood council. My question's on committees. So say, hypothetically, that I have a committee that's a very important committee, and they're not meeting as they should be. At what point, I know that I could remove the chair and appoint a new chair, but am I also able to exercise on like an ex officio status and set up the meetings on my own and go chair that meeting for him or her?
No, not, well, are you the chair of the neighborhood council?
Yes.
How was the committee appointed?
I appoint the committees and the chairs.
You appoint the committees and the chair without board approval?
Well, the board has to ratify it.
Okay,
but
so then,
I make the appointments, they
so
ratify.
then if you don't like what the committee is doing, the same appointment power is the same removal power.
I can remove.
For
Right.
committees. So you put them, you say you meet or I'm gonna remove you. And if they're not meeting, then you say, I'll put it on the agenda for removal of this and get your board to make a decision on it.
Is that the only way though? I mean, that's pretty harsh. I'd like to light a fire under.
Well, if you told me have a meeting or I'm gonna remove you, that's a pretty big fire.
So we can't share the duty.
Well, what do you want to do? You want to appoint one of the, does your bylaw limit it?
I want to do it.
No, you can't do it.
I can't
If you're not,
I can't
you can't
exercise
just,
ex officio.
You can't just step in and take the place of the power of the committee. Your bylaws set up a structure for the committee. And it says you appoint a chair and members of the committee, right? Okay, so if you wanna appoint yourself, have the board ratify it, but implicit in that is that you're removing the current chair. But you can't just do it on your own unilaterally. Your board has to agree, since you have that power to do it, you could appoint yourself in, but your board has to ratify.
No, I don't mean to unilaterally appoint myself. I mean, you know, like to step in as as the chair. No, okay. But he still remains the chair of the committee.
Unless you remove or appoint somebody different. Okay. So you have to follow the removal or appointment process.
So I have 4 more questions, and that's going to be it for tonight because we do have to wrap up by 9. Okay.
Hi, my name's Michelle. I'm from LA32. I'm the treasurer. And my question is, so we put the agenda ahead of time, 72 hours, and it's, reads to the stakeholders all the items that will be on there. But we have a particular stakeholder that is calling every single board member to get their point of view and what is going to be their vote on it. Can a stakeholder do that, call us and contact us?
Sure. And it's up to you to decide how to respond.
So we don't even have to respond, correct? We could say no comment, or
sure,
don't call me, or
of course,
I don't have to tell you.
You have the ability to you have the ability to respond however you think is appropriate.
Okay.
The only time that there's a requirement triggered on your board is if somebody makes a Public Records Act request. So if somebody sends a request, then you forward that to your secretary. The secretary will then contact the department and perhaps Alois so that we can assist you in providing a response. That's the only legally obligated response that you're required to make. The rest of the responses that you make to members of the public calling in are in your political discretion. How do you want to deal with them?
Okay. Thank you.
So I have one minor question to an issue we were already discussing, which would be stakeholders emailing the entire board their advocacy on items on agenda coming up. When the stakeholders start to cite that they were encouraged by board members to send that advocacy to us, should we watch out and when we start to cross the quorum of a quorum threshold?
No, you've already crossed it then. Yeah, you've already, because the same way that it happens is, serial communications, you can also do them through, you can't just have an intermediary do it for me, Hey, go over there and do this, give my point of view to the board. So if that situation comes up, then what has to happen is, you're gonna have to make that communication public. It's gonna have to be at your meeting, pulled out for everybody to see. You're gonna have to shine light on it.
And then the other issue, we have a very strong board, and our meetings run very long. And as a co-chair for the board, we don't yet restrict our agenda. But I think one choice that we could make that we don't employ yet, and I'm wondering if anybody has a model for us, which would be the consent calendar. Is there a template? Is there a neighborhood council that's utilizing it that we could?
Well, there's not necessarily anything that you have to implement. Let's say, for example, that I'm the chair of I'm the chair. Okay, we're at a neighborhood council meeting, and it's the minutes. All right. So I look around the room. It's like, okay, any objection to the minutes? Okay, please have them reflect that by unanimous decision the item's been moved. Okay, so I've done it that way. What you have to do under the Brown Act is publicly make the announcement. So, because members of the imagine if you couldn't see, all right? You would have to know by hearing it that, okay, it was unanimous. And you knew that Hector, myself, and Alois were present. So if I make the public announcement and say, okay, the meetings are adopted by unanimous vote of those present, now I've moved it, and it's gone, and it's done by like a consent calendar. Some items you're not going to be able to. There's going to be discussion, you know. Hector's not going to like the period in one of the minutes. It's going to want to revise it, so we're going to have to move it then. We're going to have to then discuss it and open it and have it for discussion. But there are a lot of things that you can move quickly. So, you know, try that approach.
Last two questions.
Hello. Yeah. My original question? We board members go to a lot of town hall meetings. So, you know, what can we say or not say? And then, or secondly, we organize a community meeting to deal with a specific problem of whatever, you know, gangland shooting or homeless issue, and we get all the stakeholders together.
Well, the thing to remember about community meetings, much like this one, okay, you might have, I don't know if there might be a majority of some board here in attendance, okay? But the restriction is that you guys can participate and engage in the discussion, all right? But what you can't do is you can't start talking about board business among one another while you're there. Hey, do you think that we should do this with the trees? Or hey, do you think we should do this? Or maybe even something that we've discussed. Hey, gosh, we should put that rule in place about let's restrict the, you know, board member comment to 2 minutes. And you start having that discussion among a majority of your members at that point in time. That's really the only restriction. You're free to participate in those public events, those forum events, however it is, if they're open to the public. You, your board, also have the ability to put on these public events. You're just noticing a board meeting. Notice a board meeting. We're calling a town hall to discuss, you know, safety issues. And it's just going to be agendized. If you need help, the department or our office can help you create agendas to do that. So it's all the Brand Act is all about notice. You get the notice right, and you know you can do everything.
Okay, last question.
Thank you. What is the best way to handle items that were not able to be touched upon during a regular general board meeting, besides having an emergency special meeting?
Well, you know, you're really then dealing with an issue of what does your board want to do. I mean, there's not necessarily any legal response to this question. You know, how do you handle it? I mean, technically, what would happen is those items that aren't addressed, they're continued. You know, so they can be continued to the next agenda item. The chair could put them on, or the chair. It depends on who has discretion to create the agenda. The chair may decide, okay, we've had this one on, it's for 3 years, we've never gotten to it, we're probably not going to get to it now. All right? But if you're also dealing with the situation where your meetings are running long, okay, or nobody wants to be at a meeting till 2 in the morning, you know? I think people probably started nodding off like about 8, all right? So you're getting at the upward limit about what a meeting can really go to. So you have to start evaluating then on your agenda when you create it is, if you know that you've had a history of having long meetings, then you've got to start capping comment, okay? I'm gonna put a cap. So when I do my agenda, on my agenda where I've listed the item where we're discussing trees in the park, all right? It's like 5-minute public comment on this issue, all right? I buy a big old clock so I can set it up there so people can see and I'm hitting it and it's like, okay, the 5 minutes are up. What if all of you show up at my meeting, right? And you're like, I have my 5-minute timer here, right? I can handle it a number of ways. It's like, okay, I have 50 cards here. I'm going to shuffle them up. The first 5 I pull will get the 1 minute each, all right? Or if there seems to be 2 sides, it's like, okay, you guys, who's for, who's against? You pick one, you'll get 2.5 each. You have that discretion or ability to be able to start tailoring your meetings so that you can accomplish the objective of finishing the meetings, okay? Public comment doesn't mean that you have to sit there and let all 50 people come up and talk for 2 minutes, okay? You have the ability to put limitations on that so that you're able to also effectively do your business. You can't let that type of lengthy comment preclude your board from moving forward on issues.
But you have to apply it fairly. You can't let all the yays be the ones that get to talk for 5 minutes.
Okay, folks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so very much.